John Wooden is quoted as saying, "A great coach can change a game, but a truly great coach can change a life, shaping not just skills, but also the character of their players." Let's talk about character through coaching on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to be here with FHU Athletic Director Jonathan Estes. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Appreciate it, Matt. Appreciate being here, getting this thing started. One of my friends talks about the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, so I'm glad to be here to start this step with you.
I mean, man, you always have some good quotes too. Like one of the things that you do a lot of chapel talks here at Freed-Hardeman, and there's always memorable things that you say. Like one of them was like, we need to be like sequoia trees. And I know that we always kind of joke with you about that one, but you always have different things. You opened the show with a good quote there. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've known you for quite a while. I came back to Freed-Hardeman in 2013, and you began coaching at Freed, I believe, in 2009. So you came back after a few different things that you did as far as coaching and professional career and things like that. So I know you pretty well, but our listeners might not. So give us a little bit of background about some prior experience that you've had with maybe your playing career and coaching, things like that.
I started out of high school at Division I, St. Louis University, playing baseball. Obviously, that's my background as an athlete. I played high school basketball as well, and was pretty decent player as well in high school basketball, but I was just a better baseball player, so I ended up pursuing that at the collegiate level and spent a year at St. Louis University and then transferred to Freed-Hardeman, spent my last 3 years here and graduated and was actually drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals and spent 3 years playing professionally with them. And it was really during that time of playing professionally that I kind of started to see myself as a coach.
Yeah.
Growing up in St. Louis areas where I grew up, and my dad was a high school baseball, basketball, football coach and taught math at high school there in suburban St. Louis. And I knew what the coaching life was all about, but I didn't ever really see myself doing it until starting to play professional baseball and doing that. And I started to look and say, I can't imagine going into an office,
right?
And sitting down at a desk. Like I like being outside. I like working with people. I like playing the game. And there's so much in sports that we can teach young people. And that's where I really started to say, you know what, I want to do this. So when my playing career was over, I jumped right into the opportunity to start coaching and actually started coaching some high school basketball while I was playing. I'd play, March through September. So I was available to coach. So I coached a freshman team of a high school basketball team for a few years while I was playing. So that's kind of really how it got started. And, my first job at the collegiate level was at Harris-Stowe State University, which is a historically black college in St. Louis. And I was really lucky to get a job at such an early age, head coaching job at the collegiate level. So I was 26 when I got that job, and my brother had played there and graduated there, and the AD knew him really well, and he was actually my first assistant coach. He had just graduated, so it was a great way to get my career started. But I've always had coaching all around me, and is something that I've had good examples, and have had bad examples,
right,
of coaches, and so I've always kind of known. About coaching, but like I said, until I really got into playing professional baseball, had not seen myself in that role. So that's kind of where that journey went.
Yeah, and obviously you were a pretty successful player within your time at Freed-Hardeman. I was actually looking up some information about you before you came in here, some of your background information on that, and you have, I think this might not be as if this was on the website, so this might not be accurate, but career ERA still hold the record, 2.72 ERA career throughout your time at Freed-Hardeman, and complete games pitched 25. So I guess if you have an ERA that's that low, you can pitch longer innings and have more complete games. So
yeah, when I came here, things have changed a lot just in baseball, collegiate baseball since I played. Bats have gone through multiple levels of difference. So you see a lot better pitching numbers now than you did when I was playing. In fact, My freshman year of college was the year that they went from drop 5 bats to drop 3 bats.
Yeah.
So I think the average Division One ERA was like a 5.8 ERA was
Yeah.
the average ERA. So now you don't see you see way lower ERAs when you're
Yeah.
watching college baseball. So I think when I graduated from Freed-Hardeman, we had about 13 different records that they kept track of single season and career, and I held 9 of those when I graduated. And then I've coached
Slow. Yeah.
players. I've coached players that
That
have
have beaten
broken
them.
those
Yeah.
records, which has been really
Well, that's
cool.
okay though, because you
Yeah,
could still take a little credit for some of those, right? So,
yeah.
and so you coached from 2009 for over a decade, so around until about 2022, and then you've been athletic director since then. Tell me a little bit about the difference between kind of how that is as the long time as being a coach and how the transition has been as far as, there's probably things you like about each of them. There's probably things you miss about coaching, but kind of talk about that transition, how that's been for you.
The people ask me that a lot over the last 3 years. Just I loved coaching. I still do coach. I have 2 sons that are in high school, and I coach their summer baseball teams, and I coach my daughter's youth basketball. So I'm still involved in coaching. To a certain degree, you could say that I'm still coaching. Just coaches. I'm coaching coaches now,
Right.
and working with them. We've got a lot of young coaches on our staff, and getting an opportunity to work with them. So I still get an opportunity to try to educate and try to help. And that's really at the core of the reason why I was a coach, is because I love serving and I love trying to empower and encourage young people and to have the same type of experiences that I had as a player. So I get to do some of that coaching still. I miss some of the locker room and the really close relationships
Yeah.
that you get with players, and just going back and thinking about some of the players that played for me over the years. Just some of those guys were a complete mess when they came in as a
Yeah.
freshman, and then to see where they are as they graduate and even 5 years afterwards, and to see the growth that they made. Like some of those relationships, I don't get some of those now as an athletic director, because I'm not developing as close of relationships with some of those guys. And so I miss some of that, and just I'm a very competitive person by nature
Yeah.
too, and having to find ways to fill that competitive void
Yeah.
has also been a transition for me. But I do that with some racquetball and some basketball,
Intramural
intramural
basketball. We've been
basketball.
known to play some intramural basketball together, and yeah, there is a little competitive edge going on there. I like it though. He helps us win some games. So we were thinking about, we talked about some of the success you had at Freed-Hardeman. Went on to play for the Cardinals for 3 years in the St. Louis Cardinals organization. So you mentioned something earlier that kind of piqued my interest here. So you mentioned that sometimes you don't always see things when you're in the middle of it, but as you kind of went throughout your career, you kind of recognize these different things you wanted to do as coach, and you wanted to do some coaching opportunities and things like that. I think the same can be true with when we're talking about today, character through coaching. Sometimes when you're in the middle heat of the competition, you don't always see maybe the way that you should do things. And then looking back, you're like, this is probably the way I should have done some things. Maybe I should have done some things differently. So I think that's sometimes the way character can be. So as a coach, just from your experience as a coach, how would you define character just in the context of athletes and trying to develop that in them? What would you say your definition of character would be?
Well, as a Christian, that's where it starts for me. Is trying to exemplify the characteristics that Christ had, and we talk a lot about love, and we talk a lot about grace, and we talk a lot about those things that Christ showed, and we want to do that to each other. And I think it's really important for all coaches early in their career, if not before they get started, but at least early in their career, they need to really sit down, coaches do, and decide who they want to be. Because when you get in the heat of competition, sometimes everybody's seen that you become somebody that you're not, or
Right.
or you can go off. So you need to really define what those principles that you want to stand for, and what you want to be known for. And I told our players whenever I coach them, and even when I get a chance to speak with groups now, what do you want people to say at your eulogy?
Mm.
What do you want people to say at your Hall of Fame speech? What are the things that you want people to define you and say about you at the end of your career, at the end of your life? And those are the things that you need to go about right now and try to live those out. So when we talk about character, it's what are the core principles that you want to live out on a daily basis, and we need to go out and we need to teach these young people what that looks like,
Mm.
and show them a lot of examples of what that looks like, not only in our lives but also in the lives of the people that they look up to and around, and then try to help them grow in those areas, because character and just moral principles and things of that nature, it's not something that you're going to just be able to put a check next to
Yeah.
this, like I've got this figured out.
Yeah, it's
It's something.
kind of an ongoing process, and
Yeah.
when we think about character, at least when I'm looking at it, it's one of those things. It's not just one action that defines it. It's kind of a sum of all the different things that you've done in your life or throughout your playing career, and you kind of become known for that. And that's kind of what, to me, what character is. It's how you're perceived by others, and a lot of times that's a lot of different actions, not just maybe one thing.
Yeah, it's ongoing, and we're not perfect. People that I know that are very mentally tough, they're not mentally tough 100% of the time, and it's good for us to recognize that in other people. This is somebody I really look up to in this area, but they're not 100 out of 100 in
Right.
that area, and it's okay to make mistakes, but we grow from those and we get better. So it's a continual process and a continual, journey. And like I said, it never ends.
Yeah. And when we're thinking about developing character in players, every player is going to be different. You recruit a player, every individual is going to be different. But thinking about how we balance thinking about a person's skills, like an athlete has a lot of skill coming in. So you don't want to necessarily take away that competitive edge either. But how do you kind of balance developing them athletically, but also focusing on that character? What's kind of the things that maybe you did as a coach that maybe helped you to maybe balance both of those things?
Well, if character and developing our young people is important, then you have to take into consideration not only their physical skills and developing those physical skills, teaching them how to shoot a jump shot or teaching them how to throw a curveball or putt or whatever the
Yeah.
coach, whatever you're coaching. It's important that you teach those physical skills, but you also have a responsibility to teach them character and dedication and determination and responsibility and integrity, and when those are important to you as a coach, then you're not going to compromise whenever individuals don't meet the standards
Mm.
that you set. And sometimes unfortunately we see that play out in national programs where individuals will maybe get a slap on the wrist because they're a really talented
Right.
player when they break a rule. And if you're a coach who's going to be committed to coaching that, you have to put the program ahead of the player,
Yeah.
and you can't let a player be bigger than the program. So if a player struggles with being responsible or being a good teammate or living up to the standards of excellence that you have within your program, there has to be consequences and things of that nature. So a lot of what you're doing and teaching is by how you interact and how you deal with things that come up. Because a lot of times, they say, that people see what we do more than they listen to what we say.
Yeah.
So if I keep on talking about being a good teammate, but somebody goes out and they miss practice, for some reason, and there's no consequence, or a bad teammate, there's
Yeah.
no consequence for that, then what's the rest of the team going to think? Oh, it's okay. Coach doesn't really care about that. He just cares about winning.
Right.
So you have to be consistent with what your expectations and those standards of excellence, and make sure that your players are responsible to growing physically, but they're also growing how good they are at practice, how good of a teammate they are.
Yeah.
All the things that you talk about, those are important.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of times we see these, sometimes we call them character flaws and different things through times where things aren't going great, right? So if, when things are going well, you're winning. A lot of times you don't notice some of these negative things that maybe come out of athletic programs, whether it be nationally, NAIA level, whatever it is. So thinking about failures and different, maybe seasons not going well, how do you guide players through moments of failures or times that maybe the season's not going well in ways that strengthens their character rather than diminishing it? Because a lot of times when we think about when things, people, teams are not doing well, you see a lot of these things come out. And how do you kind of guide players and programs through that, even though, because we know not every season is going to be great. There's going to be times where you're rebuilding or whatever the case is, and sometimes you see these things come out. How do you kind of work through those issues?
Part of that is just reframing success. A lot of people think, the results, that's success. If we win a national championship, we were very successful. If we lost every game, we were very unsuccessful. And just reframing what failure is. Failure and setbacks are a part of life. I don't know anybody that can go through life without having some sort of failure or setbacks or struggles or trials or whatever the case might be. So, number one, understanding that that's going to be part of life. And we have an opportunity through sports to teach young people how to deal with failure and setbacks, and reframing failure as an opportunity for growth, I think, is something that I really tried to do throughout my career. We talked about W's and L's, wins and learns.
Oh, yeah.
It's an opportunity. Failure is an opportunity to grow, and when we don't take advantage of the opportunity to reflect back on what happened and make adjustments, it's we've wasted an opportunity. And I talked a lot about, as a coach, expensive and inexpensive experience. And expensive experience is experience you gain when you have to go through it, and you make the struggles, and you make the bad decisions, and you go through failure, and you have to learn from your own mistakes. And inexpensive experiences when you're learning from the failure and struggles that other people are going through, whether it be teammates or whether it be other teams or nationally, whatever the case might be. So we constantly want to look at failure and setbacks as an opportunity to grow and reassess, and really that's how you have to frame it and how you have to learn to go through it. And it's not ever easy at the time, thinking about sickness and thinking about people going through loss, with family members and friends and things like that. It's
Yeah.
it's not easy to go through those things, but we have to be able to move forward, and we can't just dwell on loss and negatives and failure and things of that nature. We have to move on.
Yeah.
And teaching young people how to do that is really, really important. And I think it helps them to be more successful when they face those same types of setbacks in life.
Yeah. And I think, I've talked to a lot of coaches here at Freed-Hardeman and elsewhere as well, and most of them will say the same thing. It's like we learn a lot more as a coach from losing than sometimes winning. Sometimes you can win a game and not feel great about it. Sometimes you can lose a game and say, oh, these are some things we need to work on. This will help us in the long run. And there's a quote that popped up in my head. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but don't ever let a failure slip by without learning from it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a lot of different ways that you can learn from things that maybe you don't do well. And sometimes that means that you have to go through those struggles and those losses. But then in the long run, say, for example, later on down the season, you know how to fix that issue that you had early on. So sometimes those things actually end up helping you in the long run. When we're thinking about, too, the perception that other people have of you, I think a lot of times it's always interesting because sometimes thinking about athletes and players, they might not realize how they come across to other people. Maybe we call it self-awareness. And sometimes, we get caught up in the heat of competition. We might not realize how we come across to other people. And the character that we think we have maybe isn't what's seen by other people. So as a coach, from your experience, maybe even as athletic director working with all the different teams, how do you kind of help players recognize maybe the way that they're perceived or maybe the way they come across so that they can maybe improve that? I've looked up some things on this because it's actually something kind of curious to me, how you get that across to players.
Self-awareness is really, really important. And it's something that young people and even older, adults, we all struggle with self-awareness. And I think, John Wooden talked about telling players what they needed to hear, and they'll be mad at you for 3 days,
Yeah.
versus telling a kid what they want to hear, and they'll be mad at you for the rest of their
Yeah.
life. And that's something that's always stuck with me, and just how you need to be honest with your players. And I think specifically about Ryan Wood, who was a pitcher for us 2010 through 13, and he was a graduate assistant for a couple years, and he went on to be a high school baseball coach, and now he's Dr. Wood and is a principal, and just he's had a great career, a young guy. But I remember him coming into my office when he was a sophomore or junior, and he had really not ever had, many opportunities to pitch for us. And we had a real honest conversation. He said, Coach, he said, what do I need to do in order to get some innings? And we had a real honest conversation.
Yeah.
And I said some things that I know for a fact in the moment really hurt his feelings.
Right.
But he took the things that I said and he went out and he worked very, very, very hard to try to improve those areas and wanted to try to prove some things. And as a senior, he comes out, and about a third of the way through the year, he starts pitching game 3 of our series, and he pitches well and he gets another opportunity. By the end of the year, he's got a 2.46 ERA, which is one of the top 5 ERAs, single season ERAs. And for a guy who basically had gotten less than 5 innings pitched his freshman through junior year, to have one of the best single season ERAs in the history, this is a guy who took negativity. He wanted to be aware of his weaknesses. I pointed those out to him, and he took advantage of them. And so, I encourage players to be honest with their teammates, because a lot of times teammates will tell each other what they want to hear, you know, and it's very, very important that we as coaches are honest with our players. We're honest with their abilities, but we're also open to, if they go out and improve or work on those things, then we can say, hey, I was wrong.
Yeah.
You need to be playing. You are showing that you're doing the things that we want you to do. So having the integrity and the self-awareness as a coach that sometimes we get it wrong as well, is it's important to be able to correct. But, just being honest and truthful and trying to help them to see what they need to work on and who they are. And, hey, you've got 3 guys ahead of you. Just being honest with them about that. And even during the recruiting process, when you're recruiting players, being honest with them is, hey, we think that you have an opportunity to be a really good player. You've got a couple guys in front of you right now, and you're going to have to work really, really hard to pass those guys before you start getting some playing time. I think that maybe will turn people off sometimes, but like I said, I'd rather a person be mad at me for 3 days because I said something that they didn't like versus me telling them.
Wasting a year of their, college career because they've never got, someone deceived them. Yeah. And so, when we're thinking about this too, one of the things I looked up on how to help players be more self-aware, I thought it was interesting, was video analysis. So thinking about, hey, this is how you kind of come across on the field, being able to show a player that. I don't know if that's something you've ever done, but I know there's a lot of video out there now, probably more so than the past 20 years, where you can see pretty much every game you play, and being able to point out maybe certain behaviors. Certain teams kind of become known for things. You've coached long enough where you go to certain places and you're like, yeah, these players kind of act this way. And sometimes they're aware of it, sometimes they're not. Sometimes that's a culture thing, like we've talked about before. But, have you ever done that where you said, hey, this is kind of some things you're doing, this could maybe come across in a way that's not really what we want our program to be about? Has that something you've ever done? I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah,
we've used video just to point things out like that. I tell you, one of the things that we always did in our program as well is we did evaluations and we filled out surveys, and we actually had teammates, comment on positive and negative traits that they saw within the program, and those individuals that maybe a lot of people pointed out, hey, this person tends to have bad body language on the field. We would talk about that. This is what your teammates are seeing, and it was a conversation that we could have. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times during those conversations, those players just looked at you like, I can't believe that's what people think. Yeah. And it really opened their eyes and caused some conversations. Players going back and talking to their teammates and, hey, I really want to get better at this. And, I want you to help me anytime I start to have bad body language on the field. I want you to point it out to me. Yeah. So if they're not aware, they can't improve it and correct it. And, there's some people that are just going to get their feelings hurt. Yeah. But, a lot of times they'll come back around to, hey, if this 50% of our team thinks I show bad body language,
it's probably true.
It's probably true.
Yeah, and having those tough conversations like you talked about is important. It's better than someone to be mad at you 3 days than to regret something they did throughout their career, and then they kind of blame that nobody really brought it up to them. So it's kind of important to have those. I want to skip down just a little bit here, talking about leadership. When we're thinking about developing players, character development is important. And a lot of times what that does is when you have players that have good character and, like you mentioned, you knew early on in your playing career that you wanted to be a coach. And part of that was because you wanted to help develop players. And there's probably other players you've coached that have felt the same way. So thinking about players that maybe are emerging into leadership roles, maybe it's a freshman that played for, freshman, sophomore year, and they're kind of stepping into a role that formerly was held by a junior or senior when they get a little bit older. How do you kind of coach players into those roles and help them understand not only that it's important to win, but also the character development, how you work with your teammates? You talked about being a good teammate earlier. And that's one of the most important things in being a leader is, doing the things that you're expecting others to do, being the first one out there to do it. How do you coach that? There's a lot of different probably theories out there on how that's done, but from your experience as a coach, players that are kind of up and coming leaders that you can kind of tell, how do you coach them in that?
Well, the first thing is you have to be intentional about it. It's not just going to happen. And I hear a lot of times like, hey, we don't have good senior leadership. Well, just because you were a freshman and then a sophomore and then a junior and now you're a senior doesn't mean you're a leader.
Automatic,
It
yeah.
doesn't matter, And I remember my freshman year at St. Louis University. I remember at the end of the fall, I'd had a really good fall, and it looked like I was going to be one of the starting pitchers. And I remember my coach talking to me as a freshman and saying, "We need you to be one of our leaders."
Hmm.
And that just kind of blew my mind at the time because I wasn't thinking about being a leader on a team where I was a freshman and, we had all these great players on the team and things of that nature. So for that coach to come and talk to me and say, hey, this is what we need out of you, it really challenged me. And then when I transferred to Freed-Hardeman, it was the same way. I remember when I came in, a player pulled me aside that had been here for a few years and he's, had a conversation with me and just talked to me about, hey, if you're going to be the ace, then you've got to be the ace. And that doesn't just mean you pitch game one on Friday. That means that you take a leadership role and you make sure that when you're out there working hard, then you're pulling everybody else with you and you're pushing if you have to,
Yeah.
and you're picking them up off the ground. And it's not just about you. It's about you are kind of in charge of this entire group of people. So I had some coaches and players that showed me that, hey, a lot of times people aren't thinking about being a leader until they're really challenged to do it and they're given the opportunity. And I talked a few years ago at the Freed-Hardeman lectureships about the power of an intentional leader. And we looked at Timothy and Titus and just how Paul worked with those individuals.
Mentored them,
He
yeah.
was mentor to them and he educated them on what they needed to do, but he also empowered them. And that's a big part of leadership is we want to try to teach these players and educate them on how to be a leader, but then you have to empower them a little bit to go out and do that and let them have some freedom within the team and have some of those conversations. And they're not always going to go right. Just like when I was a coach at Harris Stowe, all the conversations I had weren't the right conversations. You have to have those conversations, and sometimes they go well and sometimes they don't, but you grow and you get better. So empowering these young upcoming leaders to make decisions and to make mistakes and not jumping all over them, but just continuing to encourage them is kind of that process. So I'd say being intentional about it, trying to educate them, try to empower them, try to encourage them would kind of be the way that I would approach that.
Yeah. And we're thinking too about a lot of times culture. We mentioned this earlier about certain teams have certain cultures. I think just as a whole in the country that we live in, we're very much a lot of times about ourselves. And so that doesn't always coincide with the team mentality. A lot of times, especially here in the United States, we're very much an individualistic culture if you look at us as a whole. And so these outside influences, I guess, play a big role in the way that players see themselves, their abilities, maybe their leadership abilities. So how do these external factors such as culture, society, maybe even their family background? I know with you coaching baseball, you had a lot of players from very diverse backgrounds. Maybe it's someone from another country, someone from a different part of the United States. You had players from all around. How do you kind of navigate these challenges of dealing with so many different kinds of people with different backgrounds and cultural influences? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's getting even harder because you said, hey, we tend to be selfish, and that's exactly. And I think even in athletics, it's becoming worse when you look at all the things that are going on with the money
Yeah.
and the transferring and all that. The culture is very much what is best for me. And you even see it from a lot of coaches, going from one place to another, and fans get upset about that. And you hear a lot of quotes, like, I got to do what's best for me. And
I got to get mine.
I gotta get what I deserve or what I need or what's
Yeah.
best for my family. And to a certain degree, that's correct. You do need to do a lot of times what's best for your family, but trying to get that me out and try to make it more about we
Mm.
is a huge, huge thing and a task that coaches are trying to do, because so many people they're concerned about their scholarship, or they're concerned about their playing time, or they're concerned about how they're perceived
Yeah.
by everybody else. And they have all of these outside voices, their parents, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their teammates, just all these outside voices that are telling them exactly how they need to be treated, or how much time they should be playing, and things of that nature. So everybody gets to make choices. It doesn't matter the circumstances that we go through in life. You get to make choices how you're going to react to that. And part of trying to set that culture within your program is trying to make it about we and what's best for this team, and trying to get those individuals to elevate their teammates and try to make their teammates better, and focus more on their teammates and the team than focus on themselves. And, everybody has different ways that they try to do that. And we tried to make it a program, make the culture of the program where the 40th guy on the team was just as valuable as the first guy on the team, and treat them the same way. They get the same exact stuff. They get the same gear. They get the same amount of time spent with them. It's not like a situation where we're going to take our starters and they get to take BP for 30 minutes and everybody that's not playing has to go, do something else while I'm working with the good players,
Right.
So we want to try to invest in every single person and elevate the roles that those players that may not get playing time, that may not get the notoriety. We try to elevate the things they're doing. I had a roommate at Freed-Hardeman, Adam Patterson, who he was one of those guys that didn't get playing time. He didn't get a lot of playing time, but he was the best teammate. He pushed me. He pushed his other teammates. He was so valuable to our team, and he never got on the field. Because of the influence that he was. And so trying to elevate that guy and try to make them understand that what they're doing is important. It's important for a coach to articulate that to them and tell them, say, hey, I know you want to be out there on the field, but I really appreciate what you're doing, because you're making everybody else better in the program. So you really gotta accentuate the things that everybody's doing positively, and not just who's scoring 20 a game and who's hitting, all the home runs. It's every single person on the team. And when you have that culture that we is important and it's more important than me, you start to understand that, hey, the decisions that I make, they impact everybody. And I want to make sure that I'm making good decisions, not only for me, but also for this entire team. I heard somebody say, you're not just letting yourself down, you're letting your teammates down when you make a bad decision, or when you decide to skip class or do something on the weekend that you shouldn't be doing. It impacts everybody. Yeah. And so trying to get young people to think that way, I think, is very, very important, and it's getting more and more difficult, it seems like, because of, you mentioned society and culture. That's not what we're seeing on, social media and things of that nature.
Yeah, and you mentioned investing in players. I really like how you mentioned that, how investing in the best player on the team and the one that maybe doesn't play. I really like that. I think that's really good. It kind of speaks to this idea of sustainability. So one of the things with character, you're hoping to reach them as a player and as an athlete on your team, but the overall goal, probably if you ask any coach, is they can take that with them after they're even done with you and carry that on to their life, if they're in a job or if they play professionally or whatever it is that they do. You want that to be something that doesn't stop at the school that they're at. You want that to carry on. So what are some things maybe that you've done, or maybe some things that you've seen that has helped you as a coach and as an athletic director to ensure that it doesn't just stop at Freed-Hardeman, that they're able to take these character development, these different skills they've learned, not just on the field, but off the field, and carry that on to their future things that they do, whether it's a job or who they interact with in the future?
Well, you mentioned the very beginning, just, the quotes sometimes, the stories. I think that that's really important to you define the principles and the characteristics that you want within your program, the culture that you want to be known as, and then you have to reinforce that every single day. And the way that I love doing that is like you mentioned, quotes, stories, things that just the terminology that we
Mm.
use within our program. I mean, a lot of the things that I say concentrate on the process, not the results. Thoughts become things. Excellence over perfection. These little catchphrases and things that I would talk about all the time, and the stories that I would tell. It would be really cool for me when a player would graduate and then 6 months down the road or 3 years down the road, they would send me a text and say, "Hey, coach, I just got a new job and I was going through my manual at work and it was telling the same story
Yeah.
that you told at practice." And it made me think about that. And
Yeah.
I did another podcast 3 or 4 months ago with one of our former players, and he kept on bringing up things that I talked about. He played for me in 2010, 2011, and the stuff that he was talking about, controlled the process, things of that nature. It's the same stuff I was talking about in 2022. So
Right.
having some consistency with what your message is, and then just continual talk about that, tell stories, introduce people that are basically saying the same message. Just you want to just continually pile on, pile on, pile on
Mm.
those thoughts, and even if they don't, that the guy did the podcast, he said, we all just thought that, Coach Estes is
He just
crazy. He's just a silly guy, telling all these stories. Then all of a sudden, he's a 35-year-old adult now, 30-year-old adult,
Yeah.
and he's like, that's exactly
Yeah.
what I needed to
It
hear.
Coach Estes's thoughts of wisdom grow with you over time, is what you're
Right.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to see where that sticks, right? Because sometimes when you're in the middle of something, you don't know, am I really getting across to these players? Then when you hear that reinforcement from them years later, I'm sure that's great to hear. Kind of leads me into the final thing I wanted to ask you. And I'll try to end with this because it kind of brings a little bit more personal. But you mentioned at the beginning talking about players that came to you as a player just from different backgrounds, maybe sometimes not the best of situations, and you saw them transform maybe into a leader, maybe into a player that you didn't necessarily know if they were going to be, but they worked hard and all that. Do you have a particular story that kind of comes to mind, personal story, whether it's from a player or just from an experience you had recruiting or whatever it is, where maybe the coaching or just the influence that the team had on a player transformed their character in a significant way? Do you have any certain example that comes to mind with that?
It would be hard to point out one. There's just so many. There's so many kids that and things that I think about right now. One of the things that's really cool is to see all the players that I've coached that are now coaches. Even Coach Trask, that's the head coach now at Freed-Hardeman, is a guy that was a assistant coach for me, and JD Flowers before him, who went down to Alabama, was a head coach,
Mm-hmm.
and all the players that are high school coaches. Corey Russell was a graduate assistant, that he's a head coach down at junior college in Texas now, and guy at Alabama, Mississippi Valley State, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
that's the head coach down there, played for me at Harris Stowe, and he's a Division I head coach. So all these players that I've had an opportunity to impact that now are going off and coaching, and I'll get an email or a text message or whatever the case might be, and hey, coach, can you share with me that chart that we used to do? Or hey, tell me more about what we used to do. And I see them taking those things, but those are really cool stories. And the ones that I think about that really mean the most are, a lot of times there's players where you just don't think they're gonna make it.
Yeah.
And they're struggling. I can think of 2 or 3. Bo Cavanis, was a guy that,
Yeah. Great player.
great. I mean, we
Yeah.
just inducted him to the Hall of Fame this fall, and he's just killing it in physical therapy, and just having a great career. He's a great Christian husband, and but there was a period of time where he was playing. It was like, man, this guy, like, we're just butting heads all the time,
Yeah.
and it's a struggle. But he overcame those things. I think about in the World Series in 2018, the year that we went to the World Series. Early in the year, we had 3 really good outfielders, and Darcy Moore, who was a senior that year from Canada.
Yeah.
He had been a starter his sophomore and junior year, and he was just kind of getting squeezed out of playing time his senior year. And we had some really tough conversations as
Yeah.
the year went on, and he stuck with it and came through, that situation. And I'll never forget the night before the championship game we're playing against Southeastern. I was dropping everybody off after dinner, and he stayed on the bus when everybody got off. And I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it. And he said, "Hey, coach," he said, "I want to play tomorrow, but I understand if I'm not in the lineup, because we had Wes Brooks, who was should have been an All-American that year, and DeMichael Holmes, who was outstanding, and Kaimana Ancog from Hawaii was our center fielder. We had 3 really good outfielders, and Darcy had a great year that year. He hit 5 home runs and a doubleheader one time that year. But anyway, I just think about those where there were struggles, and it was tough, and it was those nights that as a coach you go back and you lay your head down on the pillow and you're like, man, what a rough day, what a tough day. But then at the end of the year, you see the growth, or at the end of a career, or 5 years later, you see, wow, that was worth the struggle. And so many examples that we could talk about, but it's really, it's a really positive impact that you can have on people, and then they go out and have it on other people. And that's really what we're trying to do is try to help them, to empower them to go out and make a difference in other people's lives as well, and try to keep that seed getting planted in other people.
Yeah. You're making me have a stroll down memory lane here. That's when I was SID, when went to the World Series. And I remember all those players that you mentioned, knew them pretty well just from my time as sports information director. And one of the things I always appreciated and why I wanted to have you on today was just my interaction with you when I worked with you in the athletic department. I always thought there was definitely an emphasis on not just the wins and losses, but on champions of character. Of course, I didn't mention this before, but you had a kind of instrumental role in being the contact person in our department, and definitely are now as athletic director, but even as a coach, on emphasizing the core values of the NAIA. I remember before COVID, I don't know if there was a lot was able to be done after COVID, went into the local school system, read to the kids, just always thought that was a cool experience to be able to report on that as a sports information director, kind of focusing on, again, the team mentality, but also focusing on others before ourselves. And that's one of the things that your teams always did a great job of in the community with the local school systems. Of course, your wife works here at Freed-Hardeman with a lot of education majors too, so that's always a good connection there as well. So I just always appreciated that about you. I just wanted to let you know that, and thought you'd be a great one to come on the program today, talk about character through coaching. And so I really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, shucks, man.
There you go. I'm being so nice.
You're making me blush over here. But no, I really, when I had kids, I've got 3 kids, I mentioned them earlier, and my oldest one's getting ready to graduate from high school this year, and he's going to come to Freed-Hardeman and play baseball, and we're excited about that. But when those guys got into elementary school, it was really an eye opener for me, and I said, you know what, I want these people to have positive people in their life that they can look up to,
right.
And so we've got an opportunity with athletes, with, like you said, my wife, with her education students. We got an opportunity to try to do some things where we can try to impact people. And you talked about, back when you're SID and those things, it was interesting when I stopped focusing on winning so much and started focusing on trying to build the right types of people. We started winning more.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny how the chicken, what comes first,
Yeah.
building good people came before winning, and the emphasis, kind of changed. And it's interesting how that works sometimes, and you see that in really successful programs a lot of times, where you see how good their culture is, and all the things that we've talked about today, how they focus on those things, and they're really successful as a result of it. I like telling the story of Kevin Garnett, who they did a study one year in the NBA, and he led the NBA in high fives.
He was encouraging everyone.
He was and he was the MVP that year.
Yeah.
And the Boston Celtics won the NBA championship, and they gave the most high fives out of everybody, and I like to tell that story because it just goes to show. I like watching basketball games where somebody will miss a free throw and everybody goes up and gives them pats them on the tail or whatever the case might be, or they'll throw a ball out of bounds and everybody will go up and touch them. And you can see that the coach has coached that. It's like, hey, they're feeling bad about themselves
Yeah.
right now.
Go encourage them.
Go
Yeah.
encourage them.
Right.
And so, just seeing those things and trying to implement those and make that the culture of your program was something that was important to me, because that's what I wanted my kids. I wanted my kids to see that, and I wanted my kids to live that. And so, maybe it started out a little bit as a selfish reason because I wanted to try to impact my kids, but it grew to, hey, we've got an opportunity to impact people across our community. We've got an opportunity to impact people that we go and travel and hotels and restaurants and just everybody that we interact, umpires and things of that nature. We have an opportunity to impact a lot of people,
Yeah.
and let's try to embrace that and do it. And I was proud of our guys really embracing that and becoming, as you mentioned, champions of character, and that's what the NAI calls it. But just throughout life, being people that are high character and high moral principles, and that be who were characterized by not what our batting average was or how many points we averaged, but was this person a great person? Were they trustworthy? Were they a hard worker? Were they a great teammate? Did they love me? Those are things that I think that any person that played sports 20 years ago will go back and talk about with their teammates. They won't, be like, hey, you remember when I hit 350?
Yeah.
They'll tell the stories about,
Road trips and all of those things.
bus
Yeah.
rides, and just how they loved each other, so.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been great. And next week, we will have another coach from the athletic department. Drew Stutz will be coming on talking about teamwork. So we'll do that the next episode. But thanks for joining us this week for the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Be sure to check out this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also listen to the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Ministry League Podcast Network and on the FHU Athletics website, the Champions of Character page at gofhulions.com/champions of character. And remember, the strongest athletes aren't just built on the field. They are forged in the lessons they learn along the way. We'll see you next week on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.